It's Wednesday, and you all know what that means. It's time for another episode of the Life in the Movies podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts. My name is Ryan Cam. Thank you all so much for tuning in this week. This week, Jacob and I are going to be continuing our Daredevil coverage, and to do something a bit different, I'm going to be telling Jacob about some movies that I discovered in an article of great movies that were never made. So I think that'd be a lot of fun to talk about. But first, I got to introduce my co-host, the main man, Jacob Martin. Jacob, how you doing?
I am doing great, Ryan. I am actually really intrigued to learn more about this article and these apparently great movies that were never made. It's always interesting learning about stuff that could have been made, but they never came to fruition, and they're just interesting what ifs, and you're left to wondering, are they great movies? And I guess I'm excited to talk more about the article that you just read. Obviously, I can't wait to talk about Daredevil this week. I am loving revisiting that show. Life has definitely been really good. I'm, just enjoying seeing the continued growth of my channel and I'm trying to experiment with different types of videos, like the director projects have been going very strong. I've been trying to implement more live stream collaborations on my channel. I started a new series called Director Spotlight, where I do like this sizzle reel clip video, educational type video for people that are who aren't as big on like the behind the scenes filmmaking aspect of movies. Like they just watch the movies for fun. I've created a video centered around Sam Raimi's movies. Made an entertaining video sharing clips of some of the Sam Raimi movies in like an entertaining fashion while still being educational at the same time. So there's definitely been some really good stuff over on my end, and I'm definitely enjoying the fun of creating just fun videos on my channel. How have you been doing, Ryan? How was your birthday?
I had a great birthday. I actually, for my job, I had to work a fundraiser because, when you work for a non-for-profit, you are a non-for-profit. So sometimes you have to hold fundraisers. And what the fundraiser that we did, it was called the Family Fun Fest. It was kind of like a fair type deal. We had games. We had like a face painting lady come in and paint the faces of the kids. We had like snacks, and food truck came, and it was excuse me, I'm still coming down from allergies, but I think it was a very great success. I don't know the exact figures of how much we made yet, but I'll be sure to let you all know as soon as I know. But it was a very successful day. I ended up, it wasn't an entire day thing, so I got to celebrate after the fact, and I ended up going to see this at my planetarium. They do these things called the Second Saturday Laser Concerts, where they take this machine, it's a laser, like not cannon, but like a laser device, and they hook it up to songs, and the lasers make pictures according to the song. It's far more awesome than how I'm describing it, but it's only one Saturday a month, and I always manage to go, despite the fact that a lot of the shows are kind of the same, even though next month they're actually switching it up. Next month they're going to be doing Laser U2, meaning a laser show based off of the songs of U2. Laser Beatles, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory there. And Laser Pink Floyd's The Wall, which is just a trip and a half. If you've ever listened to Pink Floyd's The Wall, which I recommend everyone they do, it's especially trippy when you see it with laser images and but they're always a lot of fun, and I always try and make an appointment to try and go, no matter how busy I am.
Yeah, that sounds a lot of fun. I haven't seen any of the light show type stuff you were talking about, but I have seen Pink Floyd The Wall, the movie, and that was a trip in itself.
Yeah, that album means a great deal to me. It's one of my all-time favorites. It's one of those where no matter how many times I listen to it, there's always something new that I pick up from it. Like, you don't even have to be a big Pink Floyd fan in order to like The Wall, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, there's some good stuff on that.
But that was a good day there, and then on well, we're recording this on a Monday, which means that I had the day off today because working the fundraiser on a Saturday was me going above and beyond. So I was giving the day as kind of like a thank you for everything, and that was all very nice. So still training for the Great Salt Lake Open swim, and I'm up to swimming 50 minutes at a time now, which is
Nice.
seeming like the amount of time needed to swim a mile. So I'm hitting my targets there, and so I'm just swimming like a fish, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to learn more about your progress on your swimming and your meeting up with Rachel in June, I think you said it was, right?
Yep, I'm going up there June 10th through the 16th, and it's going to be fantastic because no one really invites me anywhere. Just not just including out of state. So it's gonna be a great time. But I'll let everyone know my progress as the weeks go on, because I'm less than a month away from the swim. It's crazy to think about, but man, time sure is a flat circle, ain't it?
Yeah, it definitely is. Like we started our podcast, I think at the beginning of the year, and we're what, 20 episodes in at this point, and that's just hard to believe. It seemed like we just started yesterday.
Yeah, we started the first week of January, and we are literally in almost in the middle of May, if not past the middle of May. Time flies when you're having fun. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
But Jacob, for the past couple of weeks, we've been preoccupied with Doctor Strange stuff and the monthly preview. But I'm happy to say, for the first time in 2 weeks, what have you been watching lately?
All right. I'm going to share what I've been watching. Some really good stuff. Let me come up here real quick. Some interesting ones. I just started a series where I'm going through, in no random order, Tom Hanks's filmography. I've probably brought this up in past podcasts. I wanted to review a bunch of movies with Tom Hanks because he's my favorite actor. And so recently I covered Sleepless in Seattle, and this was a collab video I did with Stephanie from the channel I'll Buy the Popcorn. It's a romantic comedy that I had never seen before. It stars Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. The premise of the movie, Tom Hanks's character, he lost his wife to cancer, and so he's left raising his son by himself. Meg Ryan plays a character who is in a relationship with Bill Pullman, and Bill Pullman's character is not the most interesting guy in the world. He's allergic to everything. He's kind of boring. He's always preoccupied with his day job. Meg Ryan is driving at one point and she listens to a radio program, and the son of Tom Hanks's character calls on the radio program. It's like this like doctor, psychologist type program. And he ends up getting his dad on the line, and he ends up being coerced into talking and expressing his feelings and isolation and loneliness. So after that, a bunch of letters start pouring in from eligible random single ladies who want to go out with him because of his loneliness. And Meg Ryan starts to have this sudden fascination for Tom Hanks's character, even though she's never met him. And so it all leads to this chance encounter, and you kind of know where the story's going to go because it's your typical rom com, boy meets girl, love at first sight type movie. And to be honest, even though rom coms aren't my favorite genre in the world, I thought this was a charming movie. I actually thought the screenplay was actually pretty witty. And there were some aspects where it felt like it was poking fun of the genre at times, while still keeping the classic tropes of the genre to keep it, as engaging and heartfelt and heartwarming as possible. And I do like the pairing of Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, even though they don't really have much screen time in the movie until the very, very end. Their stories are just awesome to see unfold, and I like the intertwining of both stories that build up to the eventual meetup at the end of the movie. I thought the film was pretty funny throughout. There's a couple of like contrived elements of the plot that definitely took me out of the movie. There's this one involving the sun and the and how that build up to the chance encounter that left me rolling my eyes. But the movie itself is still pretty good. It's not one of my favorite Tom Hanks led movies, but it's still really, really good, and I highly recommend checking it out.
Yeah, this is a pretty famous Tom Hanks one that I actually have never seen. I've heard nothing but good things about it. My friend Rachel over Rachel's Reviews is obviously a very big fan of it. I mean, it's Tom Hanks in a rom com. I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty much like up her wheelhouse right there. But I've always wanted to see it, but I just haven't gotten around to it. But I promise that I will one day.
Yeah, it's a really good movie. And Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan actually reunited again years later in another rom com called You've Got Mail, which is a movie I'll be checking out real soon. And a quick plug in on the channel, real quick. I've actually invited Rachel to come over on a live stream this week. I think it'll drop Friday, where we'll be talking about You've Got Mail for my Project Hank series. So if anyone's a fan of rom coms, it's definitely going to be a fun chat to hang out and talk about this really interesting Tom Hanks movie that I'm excited to check out this week.
Oh, You Got Mail's one of her all-time favorites, so that's going to be an interesting video. I'll definitely have to be diving into that. So, what else you got? I saw on your channel that you just recently covered on your Ivan Reitman project. I know how to talk. Called Legal Eagles. Is that right?
Yeah, Legal Eagles. The video actually dropped just today at the time of recording this video. This was actually Ivan's follow-up film after Ghostbusters, and it's a movie that I had never even heard of. It's like this crime comedy thriller type movie. Robert Redford plays a hotshot lawyer, and he ends up teaming up with another idealistic hotshot lawyer as well, played by Deborah Winger. And they team up together to investigate the mysterious stuff involving this mysterious woman played by Daryl Hannah, who is a thief who is trying to steal some fancy paintings. She claims the paintings are actually hers, that were stolen from her after a bad incident when she was a kid. And so the two lawyers have to put themselves to the test, put aside their differences and egos, and figure out what's actually going on. This movie actually does have a pretty good all-star cast. Besides the three actors I've mentioned, the movie also has Brian Dennehy, the corrupt sheriff in Rambo First Blood, who has a fun supporting role. Terrence Stamp, General Zod from Superman 2, is even in this movie, and he was a lot of fun. It's not one of Ivan Reitman's best movies. The movie started out pretty boring, in my opinion, but once Robert Redford and Deborah Winger started teaming up together, and we see the excellent chemistry unfold, the back and forth tension between the two, and the rom com elements start to play with their characters, the movie actually becomes a lot of fun. It's not one of my absolute favorites. I think there are some cringy elements in the story, especially some of the stuff with Daryl Hannah's character, but not a bad movie. It's definitely not as memorable as, let's say, Ghostbusters or even some of Reitman's earliest films like Stripes, but not a bad one to check out on a rainy day.
If my timeline is right, Stripes was 80, so this would have
81.
81. It is definitely not right, but thank you. At 81, so you should be coming up on Ghostbusters very soon, right?
Actually, Ghostbusters came out in 1984.
Oh,
And
okay.
Legal
So,
Eagles was 86. I did a
oh,
live stream collab with Q Reviews a couple weeks ago, and we had a big epic chat on Ghostbusters. It wasn't one of my traditional movie reviews.
gotcha.
That was a really awesome chat, by the way. He is like the biggest Ghostbusters fan that I know of. and we had a really good conversation talking about everything Ghostbusters, what we love about the movie, and pretty much the franchise as a whole. And that was a really good conversation.
Well, that sounds great. Well, I also see that you unfortunately had to suffer through open season scared silly.
Yes, I can't believe we live in a world where there are four open season movies. People complain that there's three Cars movies, and to me, some of the Cars movies get too much hate personally. But there are four open season movies. How does that happen? I don't get it. I will say this fourth film is the best of the sequels, but that's not saying much. I give it credit that it actually feels like a direct sequel to the first film, unlike two and three, which they just did a random story with these characters that might have worked better as a short film than a feature length movie. At least this one brings back the villain from the first movie, and open season is tied directly into the plot. So if you want a more direct open season sequel, this fourth film is the one to go, but it's still not a good movie. They try to juggle between a follow up to the first movie and doing like this Halloween werewolf story. And the two stories do not mesh together at all. And so the story is pretty incoherent throughout. Obviously, it being a direct to video film, the animation's still cheap. They don't have the original voice actors from the original movie, so the voice acting isn't that good. It's still not a good sequel, but if I had to choose between any of these sequels, I'd rather watch Open Season 4 than 2 and 3, but they're still pretty bad sequels. I'm glad I got through them.
Yeah, see, I mean, you're stronger than I am in that regard, but it's like the first open season was fine. I
Yeah.
had no idea that there was like a secret market for like three more of these movies. It's uh, how how I ask you.
Money.
Oh,
We
there you
got
go.
to have money.
Money. Yeah, there you go.
All right. And then
And
another one I definitely need to talk about. The Matrix Resurrections. That's one I watched recently. That video dropped the other day. Oh boy. I didn't like it, folks. This was not a good movie. I don't think the movie justified its existence. The story goes the Wachowskis were kind of forced to make this movie because Warner Brothers wanted to make another Matrix movie. They said, either you make it or we'll get somebody else. And so I felt like this was one of those movies where I felt like even the creators intentionally made a bad Matrix movie just so nobody else could touch or harm this franchise. And honestly, it shows. I don't fully understand what they were going for in this movie. There's like three different story ideas crammed into one, and they don't mesh well together. Like it tries to be a sequel to the original trilogy. That stuff wasn't too bad. I kind of like seeing where things were after Revolutions and try, a little bit of balance between humans and machines. That wasn't too bad. Then they try remaking the first movie beat by beat, and that doesn't work. And then they recast some actors, which are pale in comparison, like especially Jonathan Groff as Agent Smith. I like Jonathan Groff, especially in Hamilton, but he is no Agent Smith. He pales compared to Hugo Weaving. And it baffles me that they did the recast. And when you see the characters, it keeps cutting back to the original actors to remind you that, we're doing a loose remake of the first movie. And that was not a good idea. That just showed that I think the Wachowskis were making this up as they were going along. And we just want to make a cash grab sequel so that nobody can touch this property. And then I have no idea what they were thinking with the meta commentary. That was stupid. I don't get what that was all about. Like, were you trying to make a self parody of the franchise? Were you trying to be like the Scream movies? Because the commentary and the philosophical elements that made the franchise interesting do not gel together. I couldn't tell what I was watching half the time. Is this the Matrix parody movie? Or is this a legit Matrix movie you could take seriously? And even the story really disappointed me. I didn't like how they wrote Neo in this movie. Like he felt like a parody of himself. They even waste Keanu Reeves' talents as an action star. Like he only has like one kung fu scene, and the action sequences are well done. But Keanu Reeves, for most of the movie, he just like waves his hands around like he's using the force, and I'm like, why? What are you doing? I mean, he can still do his own stunts. Like watch the John Wick movies for proof of that. I don't get that. I don't get the directions of this movie, and they took the red pill, blue pill analogy and turned it into a cheap joke. This movie makes it clear that that doesn't matter at the end of the day. I'm like, well, you just threw away a plot point just like that, just for a cheap joke. I don't get that. You undermine the most important plot point that made the original Matrix the movie it is, and you just waste it like it's nothing. I did not enjoy Matrix Resurrections. I think it's a little better than Jupiter Ascending. Jupiter Ascending is a nonsense movie. I don't understand the plot of that movie at all. At least I could semi follow the plot of Matrix Resurrections, and the visuals are still really good. But this movie was terrible. I did not like it one bit.
Yeah, Jupiter Ascending is bottom of the barrel. In my review of this initially, I guess I was a bit more forgiving because I thought the action was actually kind of good, and I guess I was trying to give the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, this commentary just almost killed the movie for me. I'm sure it did for others, but for me, it was like, okay, there are better things in here, so like, okay, like you're gonna have to suffer for a while, but there is hope on the horizon. But this is one of those good ratings that I reviewed this that I kind of feel like has aged pretty badly, because the more I've thought about this movie, the worse it has gotten. And I was, as someone who had recently watched the sequels for the first time to cover over on Brevin over at Brevin's Flicks and Games channel, I was conditioned to kind of like be like, okay, these are not going to be good. And they're not as good as the first, but they're not really as bad as I was expecting them to be. I thought they had a lot of things you could have trimmed out, but on the whole, they're not like the scum of the earth like I've seen some reviewers call them. Matrix Resurrections is just like bottom of the barrel when it comes to Matrix stuff. Jonathan Groff is genuinely a very talented person. Like he was nominated for a Tony for the production of Spring Awakening, which is an excellent musical. I recommend everyone check out the score. It's one of my favorite musicals. So the dude is legitimately talented. But yeah, you can't replace Hugo Weaving as Agent Smith. You cannot replace Lawrence Fishburne as as Morpheus. And I believe Yahya Abdul-Mateen II
Yeah.
as Morpheus.
Yeah, he's Morpheus.
He was trying. He was clearly trying. But again, I feel like the Wachowskis, God bless them, they had an idea for just one Matrix movie, but it got so big that the studio just was like, here, back up the bank truck, do whatever you want. And so they're like, all right. And so that we got what we got. And so I don't think this is like the worst movie of the year territory, but for people who do believe that, I can definitely agree and see where they're coming from. Though I do think there is at least some good in this.
Yeah, I like when I reviewed it, I said the visuals were at least competent. There was money well spent in the visual effects. There was one sequence where they expanded upon the bullet time from the first movie, which I'll admit was really cool. Like there was a reveal that even the machines had picked up on bullet time and they outsmarted Neo. I'm like, okay, that's actually kind of clever. And I actually enjoyed Neil Patrick Harris in this movie. I felt like Jonathan Groff was definitely a big misfire for me. But the other villainous performance from Neil Patrick Harris, I thought was actually quite enjoyable. It was fun seeing a hammy over the top Neil Patrick Harris in one of these types of movies. But there's definitely a lot of bad with this movie, and it's definitely one of the more, I guess, disappointing, lackluster attempts to restart a franchise. I think the movie was trying to set up a new trilogy with this movie, and I don't think we'll be getting that, considering this movie flopped pretty bad and not too many people like this one. I was rolling my eyes throughout what they were setting up with this movie, and honestly, I think the Matrix franchise is dead in the water at this point. Just stick to the original three.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it just like thing. It's like with people is like, oh, Matrix Revolutions. There's no way that it can get worse. Allow me to reintroduce myself.
But even with Matrix Revolutions, like that movie's flawed, but I liked where the story ended in that one. Like there's issues I have with the way it built up to the ending, but I mean the final fight between Neo and Agent Smith was awesome, and I thought the sacrifice made was pretty well done. So as much as I have issues with Reloaded and Revolutions, I think the story as a whole, I got them allergies too, man. The trilogy still ended in a way to where I was satisfied, even though the first one is still the best and the quality was not as good, but I like the final payoff regardless.
Yeah, it's just weird friggin' movie, man. That's all I
Yeah,
got.
I didn't like it. Like normally I disagree with Rachel a lot on your sci-fi blockbusters. Like I tend to love them. She tends to not like them, but man, I agreed with her negative thoughts on Matrix Resurrections. It was not an enjoyable movie.
Well, anyway, what else do you got?
One more I'm going to share. I actually got covered two Ivan Reitman movies. The other one was Twins. We're recording this on a Monday. The following day, Tuesday, I'm actually going live with fellow YouTuber Rashad, who's a big Arnold Schwarzenegger fan, and we'll be talking about this one. He's definitely excited about talking about that. The video will already be out when the live stream will be done. I mean, by the time we're done when this video drops, but I wanted to share my thoughts on Twins real quick. This is another Ivan Reitman film I haven't seen. It's more well known than Legal Eagles. This one stars Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. And because of a genetic experiment kind of gone wrong, there was an experiment to create the perfect, strongest man. And it was kind of a botch up in the lab, and two people were born. And we got the big Arnold Schwarzenegger, and we got the tiny Danny DeVito, and they were supposed to be twins, but they were separated at birth. Arnold's character finds out he has a brother, and so he leaves the tropical island that he was raised on with some of the doctors and scientists of this experiment to go and find his brother. His brother, played by Danny DeVito, is more of a low life. He's been doing a lot of illegal criminal acts, and he gets in trouble with the law a lot. He definitely has these in and out relationships. He cheats on a lot of women. He's not the most likable character in the world. And so the two end up meeting. Originally, there's a lot of confusion over it. DeVito doesn't believe him originally, but the more the two learn about what actually happened in the past, they do form a closer bond, and they go on a fun little road trip together. I actually really enjoyed this movie. I had never seen this one before, but what makes it work is the pairing of Schwarzenegger and DeVito. Even as wild and silly as the premise is, the movie works with the two actors alone, even though on paper you cannot buy them as twins, but the way the two actors play off each other, the comedy definitely does land for me. I do like the characters, the differences that, Schwarzenegger's more likable, DeVito's more unlikable, and they actually do have a good little bond, and they do learn more from each other throughout the course of the movie. And I do like some of the supporting players. A very young Kelly Preston is in this movie, and I thought she was fun. There's a little bit of dark humor in this movie at times too, especially some of the situations that Vito's character gets in. And even as silly as it gets, the movie does have a big heart. It even has an emotional climax that almost made me cry, I'm not going to lie, which I wasn't expecting that. It's a really good movie. If you haven't seen it, it's one of my favorite Ivan Reitman films now. I think at the time of the movies I've covered in the director project so far, it's currently my second favorite movie of his behind Ghostbusters. I think it's really, really good.
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, just from this premise of twins about like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito, like that doesn't sound good at all. But I mean, if there was one person who could make it work, it was probably going to be Ivan Reitman.
Yeah, he could take silly premises and make it work. Like even Stripes, Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, two unlikely guys joined the army. That movie turned out good too. So Ivan Reitman made some great comedies back in the day.
Yes, he surely did. Well, Jacob, if that's all for you, I'll go into stuff that I've been watching
Go on
lately.
ahead.
And well, I'm going to start things off with a TV series, and as of this recording, it's about to wrap up its first half of the final season. But I've been watching Better Call Saul, and kind of a bit of a brief plug for the future. I'm going to be joined by a fellow reviewer named Ryan O'Toole. He's someone that I watched a lot of when starting my YouTube channel, so it's going to be a lot of fun to do that video with him when the first half of the final season does wrap up. I I will say until I'm blue in the face that Better Call Saul is the best TV show going right now. If you loved Breaking Bad, and somehow if you're not watching Better Call Saul, watch Better Call Saul. It is phenomenal. It's wrapping everything up. I won't spoil it because, Jacob, I assume you have not seen it yet.
I haven't seen either show.
I won't say a word in that regard because I mean, if our podcast goes long enough, I would hope to introduce you to Breaking Bad and just to see your reactions to it, because it's been a lot of fun to see your reactions to Daredevil, just to see the amazing stuff that happens in Breaking Bad, just from someone who loves the show to someone who hasn't seen an episode. But that's down the road. Anyway, Better Call Saul final season is just firing on all cylinders. I would argue that Better Call Saul is one of the best prequels ever made. It fits in every question that you have about Breaking Bad, and it just makes it all fit neatly. It's kind of beautiful how it all works. But I've been watching that lately. On Friday, May 13th, I watched the first Friday the 13th. I did not plan this, but I was talking to my mom, and she was like, I remember watching the first Friday the 13th when it came out. Now, just for context's sake, my mom doesn't like watch any movies, like ever. I mean, not that she doesn't like them, she does. It just she prefers to watch TV shows like on Amazon Prime or Hulu or things like that. She's actually watching this show on Amazon Prime now called London Hospital. It was on BBC, and she's really into that. But she watches at least a couple movies a year without fail. One of them is Jaws, and I mean, we all know what Jaws is. Jaws is a classic. But I was like, I was thinking about watching the first Friday the 13th, and she was like, well, why don't I watch it with you? And so we ended up watching it together, and it was really nice. And Friday the 13th, I have not seen the rest of the sequels. I've only seen the first one and the second one. But from what I've seen of Friday the 13th, I actually think the series gets a bit of hate. and I think it's a bit undeserved. Now, again, I have not seen the rest of the sequels, so maybe it is deserved. I mean, one of the sequels is called Jason Takes Manhattan, so I mean, there's it's not exactly like praiseworthy material there, I assume. But from what I have seen of the series, I've actually quite enjoyed, especially the first one. Watch it just for Betsy Palmer's performance because she does a really good job. And the twist at the end, if you know, you know, it is fantastic. It's one of those twists where you're like, you legitimately don't see it coming. It's handled very well. And so from what I have seen of Friday the 13th, I've actually quite enjoyed, and I think I might be in the minority on that, but who cares?
Yeah, this is the only Friday the 13th I've seen, and I wasn't that crazy about it. I can't really gravitate towards slasher movies when there's not really a character you can latch onto. All of the teenagers I thought were unlikable and stupid, and so when it's at a point where you just want your slasher to kill them off, to me, it's just cannon fodder nonsense. So I didn't really care for this one. I do like Betsy Palmer. That whole aspect I thought was neat. And the final twist was pretty good. So I guess it came around in the end, but this is a slasher movie that I just didn't really care for. I didn't really see the appeal of it. I haven't seen any of the Friday the 13th sequels, which were more Jason focused. So I can't really comment on those, but I just don't get the appeal to Friday the 13th at all. I'm sorry.
Well, anyway, let's and just for preparation for reviews on my channel, I ended up watching Jurassic Park and The Lost World Jurassic Park. And Jurassic Park, we all know what that is. It's
Yeah.
one of the finest movies ever made, in my opinion. But The Lost World, I was honestly a bit surprised at how much I liked this because I had actually seen it before and I did like it. But seeing it with like a pair of fresh eyes, I was like, okay, maybe I might find some flaws in here that I didn't see the first time. And I did. But this movie, what it gets right, actually is pretty good. The bad stuff is there. Like, for example, InGen basically, in the words of Ian Malcolm in this movie, not making the same mistakes but making all new ones. I won't spoil it, but if you know, you know. And it's just, wow, you are just a legendarily dumb company, InGen. Like, even in the Jurassic World movies, you just don't learn. But that's another story for another time. I've been rewatching all the movies in honor of Jurassic World Dominion, which I'm just not looking forward to. I don't like the Jurassic World movies at all. They're not going to be fun to rewatch, but I'm a completionist, or I try my hardest to be at the very least. From what I have seen, though, The Lost World is definitely not Jurassic Park 1 levels of good, but it's not as bad as I've heard some people make it out to be. It's a good movie with definitely bad stuff in it. That's all I will say.
Yeah, this one I think gets way too much hate. This is my favorite of the Jurassic Park sequels. I think because you got Steven Spielberg back in the director's chair, I think that pretty much makes all the difference. I do have issues with this one. I do think a lot of the characters are underwritten, and there is definitely some stupidity in the plot. I definitely agree with that. But as a fun little monster movie, I think it's pretty awesome. Like there's just so many great sequences of suspense that rival the first movie. Like the trailer dangling over the cliff is one of the best sequences in any Jurassic Park movie, and that scene doesn't get near enough praise as it already is. And I just love seeing the return of Jeff Goldblum in this movie. To me, that makes all the difference. Jeff Goldblum was so awesome in this movie, and even though like the third act is so stupid. I'm a sucker for seeing monsters on the loose in big cities and seeing them do like a Godzilla like climax in the third act is pretty awesome, as stupid as it can get. I have a blast with The Lost World. For a while, it was my favorite Jurassic Park movie when I was younger. I like the first movie more now, but if I had to pick a number two Jurassic Park movie, The Lost World easily.
Yeah, and I have not seen Jurassic Park 3, though I will be seeing it a little later this week, and I'm watching it for the first time. It's going to be interesting to see what I think of that one because I've
Yeah, I'm
heard,
curious what you'll think about that one. That one is easily my least favorite of the franchise.
oh wow, so
Yeah, I don't like number three.
well, it's gonna be very very interesting. But let's talk about some Daredevil stuff. And this episode, like stuff's getting intense. That's all I will say. This is the episode after Wilson Fisk has brought himself out into the open, saying, "Hey, I'm Wilson Fisk. I want to help people. I want to make Hell's Kitchen a better place." And it just pretty much just like makes it 1,000 times harder to bring this dude to justice because he just pretty much exposed himself. But now he has the court of public opinion on his side because he has his thumb on the other scale. This is episode 9 called "Speak of the Devil," and Jacob, I give the floor to you. What did you think?
Another fantastic episode. I think the stuff that intrigued me the most about this episode was actually more so the private conversation between Matt Murdock and the priest, because they were making the comparison that Wilson Fisk is the literal devil in this series, which makes sense. I guess that's why the show's set in Hell's Kitchen. I guess the devil wants to live there, pretty much. And I did like those conversations, talking about the devil walking among Earth and how hard it is to take him down. That was some really fascinating stuff. The structure of the episode was kind of weird, though. I guess that was probably my biggest gripe because the episode opens with a pretty intense fight between Daredevil and one of Wilson Fisk's goons, pretty much, and it's
Nobu.
pretty brutal stuff.
It was Nobu.
And what?
It was Nobu.
Nobu, thank you. Nobu is that character's name. And it keeps flashing back to the buildup of that. And I think that kind of undermined, I guess, how great the action was because they should have saved that for the end to make a proper buildup to it, as much as I enjoyed that fight. But I still enjoyed the show or this episode. I enjoyed the buildup. It's fun seeing the stories, get closer and closer together to one another, especially now that Fisk is out in the open. Matt Murdock and Ben are actually talking together in this, and he's interacting more. I think we get more Foggy and Karen and their participation in what's going on. And it all builds up to a pretty good finish. Like, Kingpin really beats the crap out of him at the end. Like, throws his back down on the table. Like, that's almost as brutal as Bane breaking Batman's back, almost on that level. I'm curious how he's going to come out of that situation. That's probably going to take a while for him to recover from that. That's pretty brutal stuff right there. And we get a good little bombshell at the end where Foggy finds out that Matt Murdock and Daredevil are one and the same. I have not seen the next episode yet, but scrolling through on Disney Plus, the next episode is called Matt versus Foggy. And yeah, I think that's going to be a good little showdown between the two characters. Not a physical fight, maybe more so a philosophical fight. And I'm excited to see where that's going to lead going forward. This is another really great episode. And once again, Ryan, I must stress enough. Thank you for continuing to get me hooked on this series. And I'm excited to see where it's going.
Yeah, oh, it's my pleasure. It was because I remember discovering this for the first time, and this was like years after. Like, I think people were watching season 3 when I was watching season 1 because that's how behind on things I am sometimes. And I just was like, now I understand. Now I understand why people love this show so much. And the next episode is called Nelson versus Murdoch, and this is going to be the episode where we learn how the two met, how they were working at Landon and Zach, the bigger law firm, and then they decided, you know what, let's just do this ourselves. And just it's gonna be very much a character piece and not necessarily an action piece from what my memory does serve. And so I'm so excited to hear what you will have to say about that. But we only have a few episodes left in the season. Things are coming to a head, for lack of a better term, and so it's going to be amazing just to see where the show goes, because I'm kind of reliving this as well because I haven't seen this in a very long time. So I know vague stuff of what happens, but it was definite refreshers, and it was a very nice refresher. And I guess a bit of a programming note: once Jacob and I finish season one of Daredevil, there's actually a order of how things happen chronologically according to the Marvel timeline. And next up is season one of Jessica Jones. So after Daredevil season one wraps up, we're going into Jessica Jones season one, and then following that timeline from there. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. But Jacob, let's get into the main event for the evening. And you know, a long time ago, I discovered this article on this site called Insider, and it's called 18 Amazing Sounding Movies That Were Never Made into Finished Films. And this was uploaded in 2018 to the site Insider. I will put a link in the description if you all would like to look for yourselves. And there's a part of me that always is fascinated by how movies are made, and especially the ones that don't see the finish line, because you hear about production hell and how things are like, oh, there's activity, but then something happens and it goes back into the ether. I think the Flash movie is the best example, a recent example for me at the very least. So I thought it would be interesting to read off some of the movies on this article, and just to hear your reaction to it, Jacob. And these won't be like super duper long. This is just going to be me reading the title and reading the brief description and just going back and forth on it. We got 18 movies to cover, so let's dive in. Jacob, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Well, starting off the list is Napoleon by Stanley Kubrick. And this is described as Napoleon being Kubrick's biggest movie ever. And Kubrick, like, prepared for this for years. He read everything about Napoleon. He was going to make it this sweeping epic about Napoleon's life, from his early years to his politics to his war stuff, all the way up to Waterloo and Napoleon eventually getting banished. But it just never happened. The movie was actually too expensive, and there was actually a Napoleon-esque movie that came out earlier called Waterloo, starring Rod Steiger of In the Heat of the Night fame, that bombed at the box office. So studios were like, no way, we're not going to do another Napoleon movie. Are you nuts? But just saying that, with Kubrick directing a Napoleon movie, Jacob, what would you think? Would you like to have seen that or no?
Well, I'm not the biggest Kubrick fan, but a Kubrick movie that I actually really, really like is Spartacus. So if Napoleon was on the same level as Spartacus with the big epic scope, awesome action, an all-star cast to round out the story based on true events, I think Napoleon could have been amazing. And I think if he had made it, it probably would have been in my top three from him. So that's definitely a what if for sure.
Well, it was actually you, Jacob, who told me that Stanley Kubrick pretty much hated making Spartacus because he hated the standard Hollywood system,
Yeah.
and that was like near the end of like the old Hollywood stuff, and like new Hollywood was either happening or was about to happen. So I don't know if maybe Kubrick would want to do it in that style, but it would be. I mean, considering
Well,
bio.
I was thinking more similar tone. He could
Oh,
make his own movie with it, but more of a similar tone that Spartacus had.
oh, in that case, then yeah, I would definitely like to see that as well. But I mean, unfortunately, Kubrick passed away in 1999, so unfortunately, we'll just never know. But considering that biopics are still pretty popular. I mean, especially with the music biopics like Bohemian Rhapsody and the upcoming Elvis movie. I wouldn't put it past them if they decide to do a Napoleon movie with a big budget and maybe a director of some kind, and like maybe like Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu. I mean, if you really think about it. But next up on the list, and this is something you probably may have heard of, but a Justice League film from George Miller, the guy who did all the Mad Max movies. And this is actually one that I had heard of before. And among others in starring in there, it would be DJ Catrona as Superman, who would actually be one of the Shazam family in the Shazam movie. So he would end up being in a DC movie after all. Armie Hammer as Batman, Megan Gale as Wonder Woman, who would be the Valkyrie in Mad Max Fury Road. Adam Brody as the Flash, Common as Green Lantern, so I guess he would be the Jon Stewart variant of Green Lantern, but it doesn't say in the article. An actor named Santiago Cabrera, who I'm not sure if I've seen anything from that person, but he would have been Aquaman. But basically through a tax thing in Australia, the movie just like hit the ground, like just crashed and never recovered. Now, we all know the whole story about Zack Snyder's Justice League and that whole kerfuffle, so we all know that story. But see, if you saw a George Miller Justice League movie on a marquee, Jacob, would you see it, yay or nay?
I would be interested in seeing it because I like these characters, and it would have been interesting seeing what a different director would have done with different actors. Now, obviously, this didn't see the light of day, and the version I'm more familiar with is the version we later got with Zack Snyder, and his cut of the movie is absolutely amazing and one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. So it's hard to compare, but it's really interesting. I definitely would have checked this one out if it got made.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's especially interesting because this movie would have been released in it was actually, the plan was to start in 2007. So considering that this was the year before Iron Man, like say spitballing, this movie came out in 2010. Think about a Justice League movie in 2010. You just marinate on that
Wow.
for a couple of minutes. But
It would have been 2 years after The Dark Knight.
yeah, absolutely.
That's hard to believe.
But next on the list is Dune. Yes, the Dune you're thinking of, created by Alejandro Jodorowsky, which, according to his IMDb, is primarily known as making like cult movies. He made this movie. He wrote the screenplay for this movie called El Topo and the Holy Mountain. I personally have never heard of him, so I'm sure some of you out there know who he is. But according to the article, Jodorowsky convinced people like Salvador Dali, Orson Welles, Gloria Swanson, David Carradine, Mick Jagger, and even Pink Floyd to work on this movie. And what happened to it was, in the words, and I'll quote the article exactly, it was too much. The vision was too wild. And it would have been too expensive for a not so commercially friendly director like Jodorowsky. Now, Jacob, I know you're not a huge fan of David Lynch Dune, so I don't think we have to cross that bridge again, but would you be interested in this at least? I have a feeling I know this answer.
No, I'll just stick to the Denis Villeneuve one.
Yeah, that's probably the smart answer. But I mean, a Dune movie scored by Pink Floyd, I would at
With
the very
Mick
least.
Jagger. Who would he have played?
I mean, considering that Sting, a famous musician, played the dude, and I can't remember his name now, from on the Harkonnen family, and he had like the thong looking thing in that whole
Uh,
scene. I
yeah,
imagine it
I
would
didn't
have
get to
been.
that part in the movie, but I've seen the clips. It looks
I
so bad.
imagine it would have been him, and I'm sure Jagger would have loved to have done that. Like
Oh, was that the character that Jason Momoa played in the new version?
no, that's Duncan, Idaho. That's two completely different people.
Okay.
But definitely. definite no from you, and
No.
it just would have been kind of a no from me personally. I mean, I'm grateful with both the versions that we got, and both were just crazy enough to begin with. But let's move on now to, and this is one that I've actually heard of knocking around, and I just still just have to ask myself, why would they even bother doing this? But Gladiator 2 by Ridley Scott. And let me just read, I'll quote the article directly. Nick Cave's script for the sequel would have reincarnated Maximus into an immortal warrior who would kill Jesus and been involved with various conflicts from the Roman era to the Vietnam War. The name of the film, and I kid you not, Christ Killer. This would not have been a harder no, even if it could
Oh my
possibly be a
gosh.
harder no. No, no.
That would have been terrible. Like, what were you thinking? I mean, am I even surprised? This is the guy who did Exodus, Gods and Kings, where God became this like bratty little twerp kid.
This little child as God. Ridley, what were you thinking?
I know you don't believe in God and stuff, but at least respect the people that do, that go out and see your movies. This would have that audiences would have canceled Ridley Scott after if this movie was a thing. So I guess be thankful that this movie didn't get made, because wow, it would have ruined my enjoyment of the first movie probably, and that's like top two Ridley Scott along with Alien. So
Yeah,
wow,
people
what a
rioted over
stupid idea.
people rioted over The Last Temptation of Christ, the Martin Scorsese movie. Imagine if they did something like this.
Oh, and today's standards, like it would be. This is Last Temptation of Christ. This is the Ridley Scott movie. It would have been, especially because people love canceling people over the stupidest stuff. Now, just imagine that crowd seeing this movie. It'd be like a huge riot. It'd be a huge thunderstorm of insanity. And oh, wow. Probably a good idea that didn't get made.
Definitely a good thing that it stayed dead. Well, let's move on now. This next one is The Conquest of Mexico, directed by Werner Herzog. Now, Jacob, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Werner Herzog. I'm not super familiar. I mean, I know his name.
Yeah, I know the name.
I know he directed this movie called like Bear Man or Man Bear. I can't remember the title off the top of my head. But to describe the movie, and quoting from the article, about a ruthless Spanish conquistador in search of El Dorado wanted to make a movie about the European colonization of Mexico, but from the perspective of the Aztecs. Now, considering the fact that Apocalypto, the Mel Gibson movie, is a thing, I would imagine that we've already kind of gotten that thirst quenched for like movies based on like from the perspective of like in the case of Apocalypto, the Mayans. But just reading that, Jacob, would you be interested?
I mean, it sounds interesting. I haven't seen too many of Werner Herzog's works. I think the only one I've actually seen, he directed a movie called Bad Lieutenant starring Nicolas Cage, and that movie was wild. I didn't really like the movie per se, but Nicolas Cage is good in it. I'd give it that. I mean, I'd give it a chance if the movie was a thing, but probably not one I'd have on high priority at the same time. I haven't even seen Apocalypto either. So
I do highly recommend Apocalypto. That's good stuff. But Herzog is not really a fan of working with the bigger studios. In my research, I found that he made a movie with Christian Bale called Rescue Dawn, which I've heard nothing but good things about, but he was not a big fan of how it turned out. So maybe it was just never meant to be, but it just interesting to see what happens. But next up on the list is At the Mountain of Madness, directed by Guillermo del Toro. Now, we're both fans of Guillermo del Toro, so I
yeah,
think that's an automatic plus there. But this would have been based on the story At the Mountain of Madness, written by H.P. Lovecraft. Now, that's a name that I hear bandied around quite a bit. I mean, we've seen dashes of Lovecraftian horror. I'm sure someone in the comments can name something related to there, but considering Del Toro's reputation for making creature horror and some things like that, I think that would have been a resounding yes.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen this movie. I can't tell you anything about the Lovecraft guy, even though I've seen the name float around. But Guillermo del Toro, two thumbs up there. Fantastic visual director. I love a lot of his movies. And I know you could make a whole list of movies that Guillermo was wanting to, movies that he was wanting to make for a while, but they never came to fruition. I know he was the original director for The Hobbit, but that didn't come to fruition, and Peter Jackson made them instead. And I'm curious what Guillermo would have done on those movies. This one, I think, considering I don't know the source material, I'd be more interested in seeing it on the Guillermo name alone, just to see some amazing visuals. I'm sure we'll have an epic cast, and I'm sure the score will be amazing. I think this one would have been awesome.
Yeah, and looking up reasons why this didn't get made, it was simply too expensive. The studio gave an estimate that they would have had to have made $500 million just to break even. Now, if you're the MCU, I mean, that's pretty easy. But considering that this is H.P. Lovecraft, who has his fans, but they're pretty obscure, and considering that Del Toro, while a great director, has never really been one to make financially successful movies. I'm just calling it like it is. I don't think that would have been an especially wise move on the studio's part, but that's just me spitballing, if you will. But next up on the list is An American Tragedy by Sergei Eisenstein. Now, this is I'm told that Eisenstein is just an excellent director, but I personally have never seen a thing from him. I mean, I'm into classic stuff and I've heard the name, but I've just never really seen anything of his. But from what I looked up of An American Tragedy, this is based on a book, is about like the American dream and it having like not being all it's cracked up to be. I think for me personally, I think there have been movies that have done that better. So maybe it was a good thing that it didn't come out how it did. However, Eisenstein, this movie basically was just cut off at the knees because of the whole communism thing. And considering that Eisenstein is from the Soviet Union, even if he wanted it to get made, it probably wouldn't have. But I don't know, Jacob. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know anything about this director, so I can't comment on any of his other works. This movie sounds interesting. I probably would have seen it on, I guess, the premise alone, but I wouldn't have been as hyped to see it because I'm not as familiar with the director.
Yeah, it's a pretty quick one for us. But next up is Ken Russell's Dracula. Now, Ken Russell is a name that you're probably not super familiar with, but he ended up directing movies like Altered States, which if you've never seen that movie, do yourself a favor and check it out, Jacob, because oh, it is trippy as all get out, and it's one of those where you're just like, it's one of those. It's kind of like pre A24. It's like, what the hell did I just watch? But considering, but considering like Bram Stoker's Dracula and how the Francis Ford Coppola movie and how crazy that was, from what I've read, it was going to be along the lines of that. But I don't know if you're a big Dracula fan. Maybe if that has something to do with it, Jacob. But what say you?
I have an interesting relationship with Dracula. The original one with Bela Lugosi is awesome, and I love the more cartoonish side of Dracula in the Hotel Transylvania movies, if that counts. But I wasn't that crazy on the Francis Ford Coppola one. Like, I love what he was going for. I like the direction. The visual was unique. Gary Oldman's a good Dracula, but the love story aspect did not work for me at all. I thought Winona Ryder and Keanu Reeves were horribly miscast in their respective roles. And as they were kind of like the focus of the movie and how Dracula plays into that, I didn't care for the story. I was kind of bored by it by the end of the day, as well made of a movie as that is. I guess I'm not as familiar with this director. I mean, if a movie's good, a good movie is a good movie. I do like Dracula when he's made well. So if this one was good, I probably would have seen it. The fact that a Dracula movie does get shelved is always a bad missed opportunity. So I guess it is what it is.
Yeah, that I definitely agree with you on that. But I actually kind of like the Ford Coppola Dracula. Keanu Reeves is not good in the movie. At least, like, I know where the boss sleeps. Like that's very bad.
It's
But
so bad.
but I like the how Ford Coppola just went all out with the visual style. I'm a big fan of that. So I guess I'm a little more lenient on it than others. But next up is Orson Welles' Heart of Darkness. Now, if that name sounds familiar to any of you,
Yeah.
Heart of Darkness was what inspired a little movie called Apocalypse Now. You may have seen it once or twice. It's phenomenal. See it if you haven't. But Wells was going to make it before, well, Citizen Kane. We all know what that movie was. But like most of Wells's projects, it was deemed too ambitious to be made. But considering that Orson Welles could have possibly made Apocalypse Now, Jacob, I'm sure you would want to see this, right?
I would definitely want to see this. When Orson Welles delivered, he really delivered. Look no further than Citizen Kane and Touch of Evil, which, in my opinion, are his two best movies. I think if he had done this story, I think it would have been fantastic. Obviously, Coppola later tweaked it and modernized it with a new setting with Apocalypse Now, and that movie's phenomenal. I agree, Ryan. But man, I can just picture Orson Welles as Colonel Kurtz. That would have been amazing.
Yeah, and Orson Welles. I mean, people just like know him for like Citizen Kane, and I mean, Citizen Kane's one of the finest movies ever made. Let's not get that twisted. There's like a generation of people who just know him as a dude who's like, oh, the French champagne. Which, if you have not seen that, that is very funny. I recommend you all look that up. But I mean, Orson Welles is just phenomenal. Like he's one of the all timers. But just to put a bow on that story, Wells ended up doing a radio drama of Heart of Darkness. So he ended up getting
Okay.
to do it anyway, but just not in a movie. And I mean, he ended up doing Citizen Kane, so it all worked out for him in the end. But let's move on now to Kill Bill Volume 3, which would have been done by Quentin Tarantino. Now, don't kill me for this. I have not seen any of the Kill Bill movies. I hear they're excellent. I have not gotten around to them. I will see them one day. I know a general sense of what happens. I know that there's a woman played by Uma Thurman who gets screwed over by a dude named Bill, and she goes on a massive revenge quest to try and get back at him. I know generally what happens. I just have never seen it. I will one day, though. Just reading from the article, though, this would have been set a decade after Volume 2. It's about the bride's daughter taking revenge on her mom's tormentors. So, Jacob, have you seen Kill Bill, and would you be excited to see Kill Bill Volume 3?
Yes, I have seen Kill Bill. Great movies. I think I'm in the minority that I actually prefer Volume 2 over Volume 1. Volume 1 is the more action centered movie, and 2 is more character driven. They both combined together to make one great double bill because Tarantino originally was supposed to make it as one movie, but he was forced to cut it down to two because of how extended the one movie would have been. But both parts are fantastic. I know Tarantino has floated about the idea of doing a Kill Bill Volume 3, and if he does make it, I will definitely see it. Tarantino is one of the best directors out there, and I'm sure if he has something that would work years later, I think it would be really amazing. So I'm a little hopeful that it might get made. It could be his 10th and possibly last movie. Like, because he claims he's retiring after movie number 10. And if that number 10 is Kill Bill Volume 3, I think it might be an awesome way to go. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
If it's his last, I will believe it when I see it. I mean, I think I think he's kind of working us, but again, if it is his 10th, then it is his 10th. Like I mean, the dude has had a legendary career, so if he wants to go out with excuse me, if he wants to go out with 10, then he's more than earned it. But I will get around to Kill Bill eventually. But next up on the list is Robert Bresson's Genesis. Now, I'm not familiar with this director. However, this would have been an adaptation of the entire book of Genesis from the Bible. Now, we're both religious guys, Jacob. So it would have been, I think it would be fascinating to see like the book of Genesis done, because it's been done in other biblical movies before, but just like the Adam and Eve stuff and the Noah stuff, and then it's like other stuff is like breezed over. So if we want to do the entire book, it would be ambitious, but I would at the very least like to see it. Jacob, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely see it just to see the attempt to do it. But my concern is if you look at the book of Genesis, there's a lot of stuff in that book. I mean, you got the Adam and Eve stuff, you got the Noah stuff, you got the Abraham stuff, you got the Isaac stuff, you got the Jacob stuff, you got the everything with Joseph. So many people and some of the early history of mankind. So much, I mean, in a book, it's, fine because, a book, you can, put whatever you want in it. And, it works in literary context. But if you try to there's 50 chapters in the book of Genesis. 50 chapters in one movie might be a little too ambitious. I know there was a movie made in the 60s. John Huston made it called The Bible in the Beginning, where he attempted to do, I'd say, about a third or maybe half of the book of Genesis. It covered the creation all the way up to Abraham. And most notably, the whole story with Abraham and Isaac and the test of his faith. That was ambitious, but even then I thought it was too over ambitious because there was just too many Bible stories crammed into one movie, and they didn't really flow or gel as well together because the movie didn't have time to flesh each of the stories and characters out. So the movie might have been too over ambitious. It might have crashed and burned, but I guess that it would have been interesting to see how it would have turned out. I'm not even familiar with this director, so it could either be really good or really bad.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you've ever seen the Bible miniseries on the History Channel that they did
Yeah,
like
I did.
years back, but it was literally like creation, Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and then straight to Jesus. Like they didn't even try to like, and I think I might be missing some, but it was like some of the Old Testament,
I
some of the
think
Old Testament.
I think it covered Noah and I think Moses and David. I think it was a couple people, but
Oh yeah, yeah, you're
they
right.
they tried cramming the whole Bible in like 5 episodes, and it was pretty weird.
Yeah, definitely weird pacing, but I mean, there's not lacking in material in the book of Genesis. So if they wanted to do something like that today, I definitely see possibilities there. But let's move on and let's touch on this briefly because this movie actually ended up getting made. It was called The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. Terry Gilliam directed this, of Monty Python fame, and he actually did direct it, and it was released in 2018, the year this article was produced. So we don't have to imagine that imagine what would happen if it got made, because it actually got made. So just this is described as a modern day interpretation of Don Quixote, that story. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that story, Jacob, but giving off of that, what would you think?
I'm semi-familiar with Don Quixote. I've seen a couple images and stuff like that. I did see a film adaptation of it, which had footage going back to Orson Welles. This is fascinating. Orson Welles attempted to make a Don Quixote movie back in the 60s, and they actually filmed some footage, but the project never came to fruition because it was deemed too expensive, too ambitious. So the project was shelved. And after Orson Welles' death, another filmmaker tried to make the footage that Orson Welles shot and make a Don Quixote movie out of it, and it was unfinished. If you thought Justice League was bad, this cut of Don Quixote is awful. It makes the Justice League cut a masterpiece in comparison. It is one of the most incoherent pieces of trash that I think I've ever seen. The editing and the dubbing alone is horrendously bad. I don't recommend that at all. I think you can watch it for free on YouTube, but don't waste the 2 hours. It was so bad. I don't recommend it one bit. This version, I guess Terry Gilliam's a fascinating dude. I haven't seen too much of his stuff. I think he directed Holy Grail. I think that's amazing. I've seen Time Bandits, which is pretty good, but I haven't seen anything else of his. I know he makes some weird stuff, and Don Quixote's a weird story, so I think that's up his alley. I guess if I did a director project, I'll check it out then. But I guess it's good that one of his, passion projects he'd been wanting to make for years finally got made. So congrats for that.
Yeah, shout out to Terry Gilliam for getting that off the ground. Let's move on now to a movie called Blood Meridian. This would have been based on the Pulitzer Prize winning, the book by Pulitzer Prize winner Cormac McCarthy. It's about a teenager involved with a gang of scalp hunters who massacred Native Americans in the mid 1800s. This would have been wanted to have been released in the mid 90s, starring Tommy Lee Jones. However, the studio thought it was too violent to get released. They tried again a little later with Ridley Scott directing, but again, the studio thought it was too violent. And then finally, a couple years ago, or according to when this article was released, James Franco tried to do a screen test of it, and he tried to direct it himself and even got an informal commitment from Russell Crowe. However, the studio was like, sorry, still too violent. So this has been one of those movies that is just like almost there, but not quite. So just based off of that premise alone, Jacob, what say you?
I'm intrigued actually. I know it sounds brutal to watch, but I'm sure it's a fascinating story. And I think if you had the right director and the right people involved, I think you can make this movie actually work and be a pretty fascinating story. I definitely would have checked this one out if it was released.
Yeah, me too. It's a pretty vague description, but from what I did hear, I mean, if they gave it a juicy budget and length to tell the story, sounds definitely something I would be interested in. But let's move on. We talked about the Book of Genesis earlier. Now let's move on to some New Testament stuff. Jesus of Nazareth, directed by Carl Theodor Dreyer or Dreyer. I've heard both of those pronunciations. He directed, well, what would have been the first vampire movie, but Dracula starring Bela Lugosi ended up beating him to it. He directed a movie called Vampire, spelled Vampyr, so vampire. And this would have been, well, the story of Jesus of Nazareth. But he wanted to make it, but he, well, could not get funding straight up. But considering that we have movies like Passion of the Christ and like other movies like Greatest Story Ever Told and King of Kings, there's no shortage of movies based on the life of Jesus. But I don't know, Jacob, what say you?
I mean, I'm always open to seeing people tackle this story. It's arguably the most well-known story in history. So anybody can make it, and if it's done very well, I will always respect the craftsmanship of the way the story was told. So I definitely would have loved to have seen it if had it gotten made, but it could easily be lost in the shuffle at the same time, as there's been so many good film adaptations of this story, whether King of Kings or Passion of the Christ or Greatest Story Ever Told, which are all really good movies. So it would have been interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we only have a couple more left, so let's keep going. Next up is a movie called Giraffes on Horseback Salad, which would have been directed by Salvador Dali. Yes, the Salvador Dali that you're thinking of, with the mustache and the surreal art and the whole nine. He wanted to make it with the Marx Brothers. Yes, Groucho, Harpo, all of them. And it would have involved, and I'm reading directly from the article, giraffes, gas masks, and dwarves. And they tried to make several attempts to try and make it, but Groucho Marx thought it would be too difficult to make. Oh, really? No kidding. I just like I've only seen one Marx Brothers movie, Duck Soup, and that was a part of the AFI project. I liked that, but I just don't know what to make of this. Jacob, what say you?
Um, I haven't seen a single Marx Brothers movie in general. So I can't comment on the Marx Brothers. I just know them from that um, Sean Connery joke in Last Crusade. I should have married it to the Marx Brothers. And I think one of them was in an episode of I Love Lucy, but I think other than that, I know very little about them. But yeah, the Marx Brothers and Salvador Dali is just a bizarre mashup. I can't really picture that being a thing. I guess I would, if it actually came to fruition, I probably would have seen it just to experience it. But I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't
just
know.
just the title alone is a bit of a turnoff. Giraffes,
Giraffe on
horseback salad.
horseback salad.
It's just it. What am I supposed to
Okay.
do with that? I just don't know. Well, let's move on to, well, actually, a movie that has actually gotten some movement recently called Megalopolis. This is actually being directed by Francis Ford Coppola, and the premise is that an architect wants to rebuild New York City as a utopia following a devastating disaster. Adam Driver is set to star in it, as well as John Voight and Forrest Whitaker. This was actually supposed to be made a lot sooner. However, a little thing unfortunately happened called 9/11, and producers weren't exactly keen on movies about rebuilding cities after disasters. So that's been on a bit of a hold. Now, considering the fact that we live in the age that we live, I think it would be very interesting to see what Coppola does with it, especially now that we know that there is a cast and we know that this is being worked on as we speak. So, given the premise and who stars in it, Jacob, I assume this is a big time yes for you.
Yes, definitely. Just to see Francis Ford Coppola make one more movie. In the early days of my channel, I did go through Coppola's entire filmography. And the last movie that he's currently made at the time of this podcast, he directed a movie called Twix in 2011. And it is single handedly the worst Francis Ford Coppola movie ever made. It honestly feels like bargain bin directed DVD trash, not Francis Ford Coppola. I don't know why he signed on to direct that movie. The filmmaking is terrible. The movie wastes talented actors like Val Kilmer and Elle Fanning, and it was just a terrible horror movie all around. Arguably one of the worst horror movies I've seen, a far cry compared to great films he's made in the past, like The Godfather and Apocalypse Now. If this is the director's swan song, because he's definitely up there, we don't know how long he's got left to live, but I would love to see him have one more crack in the director's chair, tell this story, which I know he'd been trying to make for years. So if he can have it in him to make another great movie, I definitely want to see it just to see that, you know, this is Coppola's swan song, and I would love to see how it plays out.
I mean, Coppola's got the winery going for him, so he's not starved of cash. But I mean, at the
Yeah.
same time, it's like you make a movie based off of a like named after a candy bar. Like, come on now.
Yeah, I think I've read he is funding the movie all by himself because of the hesitation from studios. So,
that wine must have more money than we all think. So it's gonna
yeah.
be interesting to see what happens there. But next up is A Confederacy of Dunces. This would have been an adaptation of John Kennedy Toole's novel. I've never heard of this,
No, me neither.
as you can tell. This has been actually trying to be getting off the ground for some time now. Actors like John Belushi, Jack Black, and Zach Galifianakis were all penned to do it at one time, but they all dropped out for various reasons. Um, David Gordon Green was set to direct it, but he eventually ended up leaving. So this is the latest activity was 2014 when the role was being offered to Nick Offerman, but that's the last that we have heard of it. And I'm not holding my breath to see this, Jacob. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like the movie's going anywhere. I mean, movies get developed and then put on hold all the time for whatever reason. If it does get made and if, it actually looks like a good movie, I'd check it out. But knowing nothing, I have no history with the source material. At the moment, it's a hard pass for me.
Yeah, well, the last one on the list is a movie called The Crusades, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and directed by Paul Verhoeven. Now, if any of you have ever seen Total Recall, you know that's a good combination right there. This would have been a movie about the Crusades. If you know about the Crusades, then you know. It would have been about a thief turned slave who winds up joining the Christian army to free Jerusalem from the Muslims in 1095, only to discover that each of the rival faiths have more than religious reasons for waging holy war. Now, this sounds like it could swell up a storm of controversy if it were made today. But I don't think it ever will, considering that Schwarzenegger, while still around, is not the box office power that he once was. And Paul Verhoeven hasn't been doing so good himself. So I don't think that this will ever see the light of day. But Jacob, what say you, just based off of me reading that?
Um, I mean, it would have been interesting. I actually haven't seen a single one of Paul Verhoeven's movies, so I can't vouch for the movies that he's made in the past, even though I've heard they're really good. But I would have seen it just on Arnold Schwarzenegger alone. I think him doing a Crusades movie with a director with a little bit more art house capabilities, I think he might have maybe if the film would have been put together, I think it might have I guess maybe tested Schwarzenegger's strengths as an actor, and it might put him in directions that might surprise some people, as people know him best for like the goofy one-liners and stuff. However, I do think we have a really good Crusades movies already. Ridley Scott made one called Kingdom of Heaven, and that movie is fantastic. When you describe the plot, it sounded like Kingdom of Heaven to me, and I thought that movie was really, really good. Watch the director's cut. That's the cut you need to watch if you watch Kingdom of Heaven. But it's a fantastic movie with great performances, and it does examine the themes that Ryan, you discussed when you were talking about the unmade Crusades movie, where it's people with different faiths fighting, and they have various reasons for doing so, more so than just the religious aspects. And I thought it was a very fascinating movie as well.
Yeah, well, I don't know about you, Jacob, but this was a lot of fun to talk about. I just am fascinated by movies that just never get made because so many movies get made, but people tend to forget about the movies that don't get made. And I think it's definitely interesting to explore. I think we'll have to explore this again sometime. Maybe we can do it next week. I found another article from IndieWire from literally a couple weeks ago that said 35 lost projects from Christopher Nolan, Quentin Tarantino, and more. So I think we'll definitely have to explore that next week.
Yep. Part two.
Yeah, part two, absolutely.
There we
And
go.
just taking a peek at it, it just been like, oh wow, this could be a lot of fun. But anyway, what were some movies that were never made that you would have liked to have seen? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We would love to read what you would have to say about that. But Jacob, that is all for us. That's another episode in the books. Thank you so much for joining me as always. You're the best. And where can people find you?
They can find me on Letterboxd, Twitter, and Facebook. And you can check out my 2 YouTube channels. My second YouTube channel, Storytime with Jacob, is where I do the book reviews and read-alongs. At the time of this video, I'm starting a read-along on a book called, let me share it real quick, Star to Land. Pretty fascinating read so far. I'm currently, I think, when this video drops, I think I'm chapters 3 and 4, but I'm actually have been reading ahead, and I'm actually like at chapter 12 as of recording. It's a pretty interesting read. I can't wait to share my thoughts on the book when I finish the book, I think in a couple weeks. And then on my main channels where I do movie reviews, TV reviews, ranking videos, and all that good stuff. Some videos that recently dropped on my channel. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I did a director spotlight type video where I share the history of Sam Raimi's filmography and more of an educational style video. I reviewed Sleepless in Seattle for my Tom Hanks series. I have a review for Muppet Treasure Island up for my Celebrating Disney series. I recently reviewed Moon Knight from my Superhero Saturday series. I also got reviews for The Matrix Resurrections, Legal Eagles. I got quite a few live streams that recently dropped on my channel. I did like a hangout video with my good friend Anthony A. Perez where we talked all things Star Wars. I got a live collab with Rashaji Reviews on Twins. I got another one with Rachel coming up later this week where we're talking about You've Got Mail. And I got other videos dropping on the channel this week, like Open Season 4, The Grand Budapest Hotel, and others. Some really awesome content coming on my channel, and if you want to check those videos out, you're more than welcome to do so.
I'll put both of his channels and his Twitter in the link in the description. Definitely check him out. And as for this channel, on Monday, I dropped my next Twilight Zone video talking about the episode called A Penny for Your Thoughts, so definitely check that out. I will be covering Jurassic Park 3 next Sunday when that video will be dropping. And I'm also going to try my best to cover both Downton Abbey and New Era and Men. So definitely check those videos out when they do in fact drop. But thank you all so much for watching. That's Jacob Martin. My name is Ryan Cam, and we will see you in the next one. Take care.